Hey everyone, it's Austin in the middle, and I hope you're doing well today. Long time no see. I know I haven't made a video on this channel in some time. It's because I got overbooked, I guess, with content making, and I started making a certain thing for this channel, and I'm still working on certain things involving some childhood nostalgia shows and movies that I loved. But I also wanted to kind of rework this channel because I didn't know where I wanted to go. That's why I put a pause on it. I didn't know if I wanted to stick to like kids content that I watched when I was younger, or maybe just some other content that kind of bleeds into that I normally don't get to talk to about in my two main channels, Horror FFA and Goosebumps Completionist. So I decided to come back with the mindset that this is going to be content that I love to talk about, that isn't horror. Or, I find something that I want to talk about on here that isn't horror, let's just say. I don't have to love it. But I decided to come back with some more Pulp era movies. Because if you don't know anything about me, while I love me a good superhero movie, I've been a massive, lifelong superhero fan, and I've read comics since a young age. There's something about Pulp era movies or Pulp themed movies that really gravitate me, because normally they have this great ambiance to them, and they have tremendous atmosphere. They have that throwback classic adventure movie soundtrack, and there's something about them that usually just make me want to watch them all the time. And this movie goes way back in my memory bank. I used to have this on VHS as a kid. I watched it a lot whenever I saw it on cable as well. This movie was released by Paramount Pictures. It was written by Jeffrey Boehm, directed by Simon Windsor, based on a character created by Lee Falk. And the movie in question is The Phantom from 1996, starring Billy Zane. Now, looking into this, there's a lot I could say about this movie. For one thing that I learned recently about this, as being a person who grew up with this movie, Joe Dante, I never knew that he was a producer on this, but apparently he was kind of contracted by Paramount or Village Roadshow or whoever to direct this movie. And I don't know if it's true, but I did hear somewhere on the internet that there's possibly an alternate film for The Phantom that he made that the studio hated, so they hired Simon Windsor to come in and completely reshoot it. That's insane. If that does exist, I'd be glad to see it. But the fact that he's associated with this, and then if you look at the cast, you got Billy Zane, Treat Williams, Christy Swanson, Catherine Zeta-Jones, James Remar, Kerry Toragawa, I think that's how you say his name. I'm sorry if I'm butchering it. But he played Shang Tsung in the Mortal Kombat film from 1995. And Patrick McGoohan, who plays the main character, Kit Walker, in this movie's father. The cast in this movie is fantastic. The look of this movie is fantastic, especially on the higher quality Blu-ray here. That I think this is the highest quality the movie currently has, and it looks breathtaking. The cinematography is great. The atmosphere is great. The soundtrack is one of the best adventure-themed soundtracks I've ever heard. I've always considered this movie an underrated gem. Not quite a masterpiece, but here's the thing about Pulp movies. It was a huge thing in the 90s, and I blame Steven Spielberg and Tim Burton primarily for the Indiana Jones and Batman franchises that carried through the 1980s and into the 1990s. Those two were two powerhouses in the box office. And in the 90s, there wasn't much superhero content coming out. The biggest one obviously was Batman and then Blade in the late 90s. But you didn't have superhero movies, and if you did, they were straight to TV garbage, like the Captain America movie or that shitty Fantastic Four movie they made. But where it was at for studios was the Pulp era style hero. I think in the 90s, it was more so about adventure. I mean, you can look down the list. You had the Darkman series from Sam Raimi. You had The Rocketeer from Disney. You also had Dick Tracy, The Shadow. The list goes on. I mean, there's so many Pulp era movies with a similar gimmick to The Phantom from the 90s. And The Phantom, ironically, was the last of them, kind of next to Batman and Robin, that sent home that Pulp era vibe that these movies were imbuing. And it's kind of a shame because, in my opinion, A lot of these movies from the 90s do hold up very well, and they're visually stunning and striking, and they're well-made films. The plots, so a lot of people tend to, kind of fuss over the plots of these movies, but I will say this up front before I get into the plot overview. The pulp era style of storytelling has always been a singular thing. I mean, you have the hero of the story sees some villains, spies on the villains, stops their attempts and perils to get to a certain objective in the story, and then the objective ends up being the climax, and the hero usually has to kill the villains, save the girl, save the day. I mean, you can look at the tropes from The Shadow, Zorro, the list goes on. The Phantom imbues that, and the Phantom was one of the earliest comic characters back before comic books were a thing. The Phantom was one of those heroes, kind of like Flash Gordon, that were put into comic strips, and they were put out in like newspaper clippings, and this was how kids used to read comics back in the day. So The Phantom is an homage movie to a time period that preceded comic books. And as much as this movie is pulp era, I will say that movies like Superman and Batman, also, the originals I'm talking about, they still have that pulp vibe to them, whether people see that or not, because Superman and Batman are just as pulpy as the Phantom is, because both of them had to borrow from their predecessors a whole lot more than something like Spider-Man did. So there you go. The Phantom, underrated movie. If you haven't seen this film before, you need to go check it out. With that aside, the general plot of The Phantom kind of plays out like that Indiana Jones type of plot, which, if you're a fan of Indiana Jones, I would actually headcanon this as an unofficial one here, but it's pretty simple to follow. You have a gang of misfits potentially tied to this secret society of sorts that has associations with the main character, the Phantom here. And when the story starts off, we see a young boy has been captured by this group of misfits, or criminals essentially, led by James Remar, and they're out in the jungles of this island called Bengala. And on the island, their objective is to find these skulls for their boss, Xander Drax, who's played by Treat Williams, back in New York City. And he has essentially paid members or people associated with the secret society to give him the skulls, because since he has the power and the wherewithal, he wants to see what happens when these 4 mythical skulls come together, and he wants to see what the power entails. So while on the island, they are searching around for this specific area, and the boy they captured knows where it is. They lead him up to this wooden bridge. They cross the wooden bridge, and they enter this area that's kind of untouched to time. And inside of this cave, they find one of the skulls. But in doing so, they kind of trigger the Phantom, played by Billy Zane here. And you might be like, why is a white guy on a tropical island trying to guard it? Well, you'll learn in the story that the Phantom goes back to the 16th century, where the Walker family of sorts has been going down generation after generation to protect this island, because they love it and they understand the power that's within it and how it can transcend humanity. The Phantom, by all means, is not a superhero like a Clark Kent. He's more like a Bruce Wayne archetype, or the Shadow, where he can be killed, but he might have some supernatural or let's just say godlike things that he encounters, kind of like an Indiana Jones. And the purple suit here is legit his get-up in the comics, so they put it here. I think it used to be gray, but they changed it to purple once the colored ink got popular in comic strips, fun fact. But anyway, tangent aside, the Phantom tries to stop them, but in doing so, the Phantom kind of overhears that the leader, played by James Remar, was partially or directly responsible for the death of his father, the Phantom who was before him. So Kit, who's the 21st Phantom, stricken with this realization, accidentally lets the bad guys get away. He has to save the kid that was abducted by them. But in the aftermath, he's talking with his dad in like a vision type of thing. I don't know why the movie does this, but it's just a thing here. And the dad's like, you need to avenge me, look into this. They're not good people. Anytime there's outsiders, the Phantom has to deal with it. And since they made off with one of the skulls, the Phantom feels like he has to go get it and bring it back so he can protect it. Meanwhile, Kit's college girlfriend, played by Christy Swanson in New York, she's trying to uncover a story about Xander Drax and a twist of fate. And Xander Drax is this rich, over-the-top guy played by Treat Williams, and she's trying to look into the story a little bit, but in doing so, she ends up kind of, getting herself a little in over her head, and let's just say some trouble comes out of that. Meanwhile, the Phantom, played by Billy Zane here, is trying to make his way over to New York, and we see some, fight sequences and maybe something involving a boat. I don't want to give any good things away about the movie, but let's just say he takes him a while to get to New York, but he ends up getting there. He befriends a cab driver, gives him some gems, and starts to kind of spy around this Xander Drax person after reacquainting himself with his former girlfriend, who he has to stave and all that. But they end up becoming like a duo in the story as the remainder of the movie continues. And it turns out that the skull that Xander had his henchman steal is just one of many skulls that they need to acquire. And they're basically after another skull, and the Phantom tries to thwart them there, but he's mildly unsuccessful. And Xander ends up with two skulls that kind of show him the location of the third and final skull that he's going to need. And it's on this other island, but possibly tied to this secret underground organization that was mentioned early on in the movie. So they end up going to this location. Unbeknownst to them, the Phantom kind of tags along after they think they've handled him, and they end up in this really cool cavernous, upgraded in that, early, 1940s kind of way, even though it's in late 1930s. And they come across the final boss of the movie, played by Cary Togawa, who is the leader of this syndicate. And he is also a descendant of a long line of people that have had to deal with multiple phantoms throughout their lineage, essentially. And he scoffs at the idea of the Phantom and kind of welcomes him to come invite himself into the situation so he can kill him himself. But in doing so, it ignites the climax. Billy Zane's Phantom comes out to save the day. Something happens to the big bad guy. And then Xander Drax, who's the other bad guy, perhaps finds the third skull and unites them all together. But the fourth one that he needs, he doesn't know the location of, but the Phantom does, and it ties into how the Phantom operates and all of that. And we get a pretty cool finish to the movie. And in that Indiana Jones type of way, we see Kit kind of say goodbye to his former girlfriend, but there's some unfinished business on the table, and then we get like a montage cut and the film wraps up. So essentially, without giving too much away, that is what you're going to expect out of this movie, The Phantom here. Now, The Phantom, I'm going to say this off the bat. If you like just old school cinema, The Phantom is such a love letter to that. I mean, if you've ever watched 1930s, 40s, 50s adventure movies, they knew what they were doing here. And I have to tip my hat to Simon Windsor and to the sound scoreman David Newman, because they created something here that's absolutely magical in terms of filmmaking. Simon Windsor's directing ability is great. The production by Richard Vane, Joe Dante, Jeffrey Boehm. The set pieces look phenomenal. The sound score by David Newman is probably one of my favorite adventure movie soundtracks of all time, maybe next to the Indiana Jones theme. There's so many things synergistically working here that I can't help but marvel at it. The cinematography in this movie is some of the best cinematography ever. And on a visual standpoint, this is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. I think Roger Ebert himself, the famous film critic, gave this movie a 3.5 back in the day. And he was kind of a harsh grader. And he said himself as well, this is one of the most beautiful movies he had ever seen. And I totally get that. I mean, it really does rule. The acting performances in this movie, they're supposed to be corny and campy because it's pulp era heroes. So many casual people out there and people who love to bash this movie or other movies like it don't really understand that. But I think everybody here brought it. Billy Zane, who plays the Phantom Kit Walker, he looks incredible in this. He fits the part very well. He has a lot of Bruce Wayne mannerisms. And a fun fact I learned as well, he legit went and read some old Lee Falk Phantom comic strips from back in the day to kind of get an idea of how the character would carry himself. And the guy was method acting here, and it was phenomenal. Treat Williams, who played Xander Drax, is an over-the-top performance, but he is absolutely fantastic in this movie. Kerry Toragawa, the final boss of the secret society, I'm getting their name, but the character's name, but he was fantastic in this as well. I mean, especially the fight sequences and the stunt sequences in this movie played out like a Phantom comic strip. And I will say that Catherine Zeta-Jones and Christy Swanson, they were great in this too. James Remar, who played the henchman that killed Kit's father, he was also great in this. Now, there are some, proto CGI effects, but there's not a lot here. And for a PG action movie, there's some blood in here. There's some violence. There's uses of guns in this. And it's really fun. It's like a swashbuckler adventure movie in vein of like a Jerry Bruckheimer Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but before that. It's just something about it that just really clicks with the cast and the look of the movie. And of course the music as well. And I'm going to say this also about this movie, and the reason why I think it works so well for a 100-minute movie, this has one of the best paces I've ever come across in a film, where there's really not a dull moment in this movie. The movie moves at such a brisk pace. There's no time spent on unnecessary filler. It's about as lean of a movie as you can get for a 100-minute film. And the pace is so well done that I think like there's at least one action sequence every 10 minutes or elaborate stunt sequence or just a beautiful shot in terms of cinematography that catches your eye. And let me say this about the set pieces and the live shooting locations they picked. Oh my God, it's breathtaking. You really don't understand what I'm saying unless you go out and watch it. But holy crap, they put a lot of heart and soul into this. And yeah, this is just peak pulp cinema for me, or up there, right? You can't really emulate what this movie does great in, because like I said, you had like the perfect team here on the IP, willing to give it some love, willing to give it some attention that it needed, and I think they made an excellent film here. Now, if I had any negatives, this is my one drawback with the movie. I can keep droning on and on about things I love about it, because I really do love this movie to death. But the one thing that I think kind of holds this movie back is the fact that the plot itself is a bit too narrow. And I do see the problem in these 90s pulp style movies where it's a singular story. And I kind of brought this up already, where, you have the hero of the story sees a group of bad guys, spends the whole story kind of just spying on them, stopping them here and there, and then it ends up at the obvious climax. He gets the girl, or saves the girl, saves the day, comes out alive. It's very typecast into that. There's no sense of stakes for the main character, the Phantom here. There's no real faults in his character that doesn't make him relatable like other heroes that I've seen in movies. It's not like a Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie where obviously Peter is going to save the day, but he's definitely faulted, right? And he makes mistakes, and that's what makes him more rootable and makes him kind of the underdog, especially in that first movie. You don't really have that here. And I think missing that element in the story, in such a basic, typecasted story, doesn't help it stand out narratively. But other than that, I think this movie is an eye candy experience. It's not the greatest of these movies in my opinion, but it's up there. It's a well-made flick. It's fun. It knows what it is. It's honoring a time that I think was absolutely pure, especially in terms of like storytelling and action adventure or hero storytelling. It's a well-made film that kind of deserves a lot more credit than it gets or has historically gotten. And the fact that Paramount Pictures put this out is very fitting because Paramount was pretty much championing these type of movies and has been for a long time. Recently, they put out Captain America: The First Avenger in the early days of the MCU, which kind of shows that they love making movies of this time period. And I wish we got more of them because this was fantastic. Now, does the Phantom deserve to be put out there in film these days? Probably not. The Phantom is more of a forgotten character. I mean, there is a good cartoon. I think it's called Phantom 2040 or 2050 or whatever it is, where you have a futuristic Phantom. That was a pretty cool cartoon. I think he was in the Defenders of the Earth cartoon as well with Flash Gordon and Mandrake the Magician. But people just don't care about characters like these days, and it's kind of unfortunate. But if they could find a way to kind of bring this style back and execute it good, I mean, Indiana Jones 5 could have been that propeller point, but it bombed so badly, I think people are just kind of done with the idea. But if they could do it and make it, popular again, I would love to see another Phantom Adventure movie come out. And if they could find somebody as good as Billy Zane, I'd be down. So if I had to rate this thing on a 0 to 5 star basis, honestly, I'd probably give this thing maybe like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. That might be high for a lot of you, but I really enjoy this film. It's one of those movies that I think is criminally underrated, really overlooked, overhated. It's a classic in my opinion, and I love it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on 1996's The Phantom. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this movie before. Do you love it or do you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.